simplification. It works with both ways. And this book gives you both. Oddly enough, in some books, it only goes one way. And so later on in proofs, you have to commute P and Q before you can get the other one, which is a whole other step. But this book lets you just use simplification either way. So, addition. Addition sounds like it should be just 1 plus 2 or 1 plus 1 or something. But addition works a little bit different. If I have P, so someone says I have a magic marker, I can conclude P or Q. And Q, remember, can be anything. So you might think, well, this is pretty weird. Okay, it's true. I have a magic marker. So either I have a magic marker or I have one of President Trump's golf clubs. Well, he wasn't looking. I ran out into the golf course, grabbed it, and ran away with it. No. But oddly enough, this is a valid conclusion from my having a magic marker. So you think, wait a minute, how's this going to work? Well, keep in mind, true, true, false, false. When will this conclusion be false? So it'll be true in this case, because remember, the wedge is only false when both the left and the right are false. So it's only going to be false here. It'll be true here, it'll be true here, and true there. Because inclusive, right? I can use either or. Remember the apple pie or peach pie, right? So I have a magic marker, and that's true. So from that, you can conclude P or Q, whatever Q is. Sounds really weird, and I think the only time you'll ever see it in arguments is in logic books and the LSAT. And the reason for that is because those are not real arguments. Remember, they're invented arguments just to show you that this argument form works. And it does, but I don't think you should use this to go out there and make really weird conclusions, right? Where you'll see it in the proofs is usually in the very last, the conclusion. You have everything lead you to P, and once you have P, then you get to the conclusion that says P or Q. Well, where did they get Q? It's not in the argument at all. When you think addition, that's how they have it. So you just use addition to throw an extra Q on there. Or whatever. Could be really, I mean, it could be.
Are there any practical purposes for this, like in mathematics or something?
Now that you ask me that, it dawns on me that I've never done anything practical in my life, so I don't know.
You've never done anything practical in your life. Come on, you've changed the oil to your own car once, right?
Really? I didn't know that. No, I used to years ago, but now it's more complicated. My Audi, I went to check the oil the very first time. There's no dipstick. Do you know how deflating that is to you as a male to suddenly realize you do not have a dipstick in your car?
I don't even understand. How would you know?
I went back. I'm sitting there in the parking lot reading the manual. Where's my dipstick? It turns out that it's a whole complicated process. You have to have the car on, but off. Well, because you have the computer has to be on.
Oh,
So you have to push the button without the
Pedal.
brake so that the computer will come on, which you could also do for the radio and other things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
You just push that on. Then you go to the car status, and then you go to, the oil.
Oh,
And you
and it
check the
tells
oil,
you
and it'll tell you on the screen
on the screen.
whether you need oil or not. But there's no dipstick for you to go out and like.
It's all computerized now.
So that was quite embarrassing.
Yeah.
I learned that. Okay, so. And addition, this is addition.
Why does this exist?
Why does what?
Addition exist.
I don't know. But it works.
Did this exist before Wittgenstein and the truth table things, or did it?
I don't know when addition arrived. So, disjunctive syllogism. How does that argument work? So, P or Q, says somebody. But then they point out, but it's not the case that P. So therefore, Q is the case. I either have a black magic marker or a red magic marker. I should have said, I either have a red magic marker or a black magic marker. Oh, it's not the case that I have a red magic marker, so I must have a black magic marker, which is true, right? So this is true, 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 only false here. Not P will be false, false, true, true. And Q will be true, false, true, false. So when will the conclusion be false here and here? I have a false premise here, and I have a false premise here. So there's no situation where I can have all true premises but a false conclusion. So disjunctive syllogism is valid. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So constructive. Dilemma. 2 L's?
1 L,
1 L?
2 M's.
Wait, really?
Yes.
Huh.
Because lemma has 2.
Oh, is Latin Latin or something?
A lemma is something you have to believe in Latin. What happens if you have 2 lemmas that you have to believe, but they're contrary to one another? Now you're in a dilemma. It's
Oh,
the
like
translation of the
dialectical.
Greek paradoxa.
Right.
Doxa is something you have to believe. But if you've got 2 doxa, you have to believe them both, but they're contrary to one another. You're in a paradoxa. So paradox and dilemma used to be the translation of one another from Latin to Greek and vice versa. However, they've evolved so that it's not exactly the case that a dilemma is a paradox. We use them for different things.
Did di mean 2?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, like, so dialectical is 2 languages, right? Or 2 thoughts, something like that.
So if we were arguing with one another, this would be a dialect. We would be having a dialogue, 2 languages. but it would be dialectical. We would be going back and forth.
Okay.
Evolution, in that sense, seems to be a dialectical process. So we have a current state of affairs. The current state of affairs just naturally creates its antithesis, and out of that conflict between the antithesis and the current thesis, you end up with a new state of affairs, which is the synthesis, which is, of course, in that context, it creates its own antithesis, etc. So you have this constant movement.
It sounds like dialectical materialism.
Dialectic, well, it's dialectical materialism, but it's dialectical. The idea of calling it dialectical materialism was that everything is really just materialism.
Oh.
But that's wrong, because that happens in arguments too, which we don't think of the arguments or the culture, right? The culture evolves.
So the phrase dialectical materialism was more of the
That's
thing of its
Marx.
time. Yeah, yeah.
And Marx was trying to transform Hegel by saying that there isn't any spiritual dialectical
Right. It's
stuff. It's all material, but he's wrong. He knew better than that. I don't know why. Marx was.
well, if he was alive today, would he call it something different, like dialectical physicalism?
Sure, he would have to.
Physicalism is sort of where materialism
It'd be
is
interesting
now.
to have him around today.
It would be.
He'd be pissed off at all the communists, that's for sure.
He'd be pissed off at everything.
Totally screwed everything up. Okay, so constructive dilemma. I might need your help on this one. Because it's much longer.
Wait. Oh, we just did the disjunctive?
Disjunctive syllogism. Did I not do that? Didn't I do that?
Yeah.
I think I wrote it down wrong.
Maybe I didn't finish it.
You can go over it again.
What's the last one you did?
Disjunctive syllogism, did I finish that one?
I remember us making it
Because-
as far as, if not a red pen, then
P
a
or Q,
black one,
but
but
not P, so therefore Q. By the way, it works the other way too. You can go not Q, therefore P. So if someone says that either this is happening because of global warming or
it's the way the world's always been.
God is pissed off.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Well, but it's not the case that God is pissed off, because we just had a conversation last night and he was fine. So it must be global warming.
That's a valid argument?
It's a valid argument, but I'm not sure that my premise was true. Because if I'm talking to God and, with our current belief system intact, and I tell that to people, they should put me someplace for my own good, where I'll be safe, or at least give me some meds so that I'm no longer able to discuss things with God. Which is why I don't go around telling people of all my conversations with God, because that.
The API is now.
Unless you have to know your place. If I were at Union Theological Seminary and I weren't talking about my conversations with God, they'd kick me out. You gotta know your place, right?
Only certain people allowed to have conversations with God.
Yeah, if you're in, what's that section of New York City called? Harlem. How could I not remember that? Harlem. Union Theological Seminary. Of all the seminaries out there right now, that's the one I'd want to go to if I were not doing anything while I'm retired. That would be fun.
What's going on
Why?
there?
Why? What's going on?
What's going on there?
all kinds of stuff.
Well, inquiring minds want to know what kind of stuff.
We're the
Well, you
smart
could
people, we should
they're
all
on the
know.
web. You could just look up Union Theological Seminary.
But you do a better job of telling the story.
I'm supposed you're paying me to do this stuff.
I know. We're getting there. I'm letting my brain catch up with everything else. Oh,
Well,
now he's going to show
we
us.
have
Yay!
we do have to be entertaining, right?
And it's educational. We're talking about another university. Maybe they're doing something educational?
You can't go there unless you get your BA first.
So then,
Sorry about
what
that.
do you get your degree in? So like a master's in theology, or
They have 4 or 5 different. You could get your PhD in philosophy.
PhD?
And remember, I don't have one of those. That would be cool. Wouldn't that be fun, going there for a PhD in philosophy?
Wait,
And you can bring your dog,
you have to-
provided the dog behaves, of course.
Does someone have their dog, really? Oh my gosh.
Pardon?
Someone, like, you said that, and then, like, someone on the screen, like, literally was holding their dog.
So this is, that would be the
Wow.
seminary I would go to. Because you could go there for all the religions.
I was seeing that. That's incredible.
So you're not like just one religion. It's like all the religions are there. And it's a union.
Someone's holding a dog, wow.
Isn't that cool?
Very cool. It sounds
Why did you
expensive.
ask?
It looks expensive.
I don't think
Sounds
it, well,
great until it's
It's
like
New York
think
City,
it's
right?
$5 million
I mean, even the
a
homeless
year.
people are probably paying rent at that point. It's New York City.
Visitors to Union are surprised by what they see when they come here. Our neo-Gothic stone walls and
This is New York
gargoyles
City.
suggest that what's going on inside must be very weighty. And that's correct. But that isn't the full story.
no.
I love it already.
The
I wanna
founders
go.
of Union decided that if you wanted
Those
to
are all
be found as
services.
ministers ready to engage the world today, you needed to be doing so in the heart of the city. And today, we are the preeminent urban seminary in the world. The history of Union is filled with many firsts. The first seminary to have Native American students engaged in urban ministry and formation here.
It was in 1895 that the first women entered Union Theological Seminary, 23 years before they were allowed to vote.
We are the first with respect in the 20th century to African American and Black theology, for feminist theology, for LGBTQ theology.
Most of the theology stemming from major political movements of the 20th century.
And this is the legacy that we want to continue here at Union.
The seminary has been critical in the development of arguments for social justice, for racial justice, for gender justice.
All of the religious leaders that were a part of that multiracial movement of the poor back in the Great Depression had come out of Union.
Its concern for social justice and its engagement in society is a given at Union, and no one can get through here without being swept up with social concern.
Union has an outstanding, world-renowned faculty.
See
We
enough?
have faculty who come with a great deal of pedagogical experience, research experience.
I found that most of the authors that I was reading either went to Union, taught at Union, or somehow were attached to Union.
So many people who have contributed greatly to theological education have walked through these halls, from Tiller.
Fascinating.
So, union.
Well,
That's fascinating.
but it's like really expensive.
Most seminaries have means of helping those that can't afford to pay. Years ago, I applied to the Episcopal Divinity School, and to General Seminary, which is a couple blocks further down. And the diocese was going to pay for me to go, but I joined the Army instead.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
We didn't finish this one.
We didn't finish this one. Okay. So P or Q will be true, 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 false. Pretend I still have the table here. It will be false, true, I think. And it'll be true, true, false, false. I'm remembering the table, right? Where would this be false? Here and here. And so notice I have a false premise there, a false premise there. So whenever I use this argument form, P or Q, but not one or the other one, then the other one must be the case. And as long as you said this truthfully, then this will be true as well.
And you can flip it and it's still true. You flip P and Q. They'll still be true.
Right.
Okay. And that's disjunctive syllogism?
Disjunctive syllogism.
Okay.
Oh, and you know what? There's another one I should do first before constructive dilemma. Hypothetical. Syllogism. So, which one? So say I have if P then Q. I did mention this one last time. If Q then R. So whenever someone says if P then Q, and if Q then R, then you can say if P then R. You can actually do that all the way down the page. So if you had someone saying if P then Q, if Q then R, if R then S, if S then T, if T, then this is where I always get stuck, right? U,
Yes.
etc. Then basically if P, then U. You can see how that would work intuitively, yes? Of course, if I did the table, you can see how that would work. That the only time that this would be false would be when either this one or this one were false. So that's a good argument, a valid argument form. Remember always, though, you want to make sure your premises are true. So this doesn't give us the opportunity to spew nonsense. We have to actually have good data. We have to be a good scientist as well as know the correct forms of reasoning. So that's hypothetical syllogism. And I think last class I did mention that you could actually take this argument form, and if you reverse the two premises, so that you have if Q then R, if P then Q, P then R. Notice that this is the same as all M's are P, right? All S are M. So therefore, all S are P, right?
Oh, is that Barbara?
That is Barbara.
Oh my god, I'm totally getting it. Okay.
What's Barbara? Where?
Barbara is AAA1.
Ah, okay.
Remember that Barbara is the code for AAA1. I haven't memorized the codes. There's Caesar, Decimus, etc. All the valid ones have a name. But that's just interesting if you think about it, that the pattern, it's not exactly the same because these are compound statements. This is a simple statement.
Right.
So that's not exactly the same. But the pattern is the same. Okay. So then the last one.
Is this constructive?
Right.
Okay.
Did I remember it correctly?
Hey. Oh, okay.
It's kind of too long to remember for some reason.
Oh, PQ synthetic S? Hypothetic S?
Sorry, I scrunched it all up here. So
Yes, you got it.
if P then Q, and if R then S. That's your first premise. Second premise, but either P or R, which are the antecedents of the two conditional statements. Then you can conclude either Q or S. And okay, so it's easy to see, this is like modus ponens, if P then Q, but P, well then Q. And if R then S, but R, well then S. So it's like two modus ponens together. You see what I'm thinking, right? So it seems to me like there ought to be some way of deleting this one and just building it if you need it. But I've never been able to construct this actual argument form from all the other ones. And what they're actually trying to do is find all of the valid argument forms that there are at like the base of our reasoning ability. And this seems to be the list. And every book agrees, so that's kind of interesting for several reasons. One, that means, you know, those are all the good arguments we can construct. Compound arguments. Remember, the 24 valid syllogisms are good arguments, but those are more simple than these. These are the compound arguments that we can make. So these are all the correct reasoning schemas, if you want to think of it that way, that we can use. And you could build on them. So you know, if you're going to like be a computer coder, I'm sure you'll have certain patterns that you can use over and over again, and you can build more and more complex schemas based on those schemas. And by the way, once you create a complex schema that runs, you know that's a good argument, like a valid argument, and so you could use that as a new schema. You could even name it if you like, right? And it's now your valid argument, right? You can keep the list, right? You don't have to create new ones. You can just compile them, which is exactly what that's even the language they use, right? Is compiling their arguments, right?
Right.
So, but just because computer coding works that way, don't forget our reasoning process works that way too. The reason we're creating a whole world of computers and computer languages is because those are mimicking the way we think. And if you want to be thinking well, you should use good reasoning, right? So be familiar with the patterns that they figured out that are ours, that in order that structure our arguments. So that's it, and that's the list that we have. Modus ponens, modus tollens, hypothetical syllogism, disjunctive syllogism, simplification, conjunction, addition, and constructive dilemma. So those are the arguments. So we should do some proofs, actually, just using these.
Well,
So you
which
could-
one is the one you have on the board right now?
This is constructive dilemma. And I didn't do the whole table to demonstrate that it's valid, but I think the book does. Let me see if I can find it.
Conditional?
Validity.
We didn't do biconditional.
That was when we were talking about the nature of the symbols themselves, the definition of the symbols. So I also didn't talk about indirect truth tables. So truth tables, as you can see, this would require me to do I need, so I got 4, so 2 to the 4th, so that would be 16, right?
I don't know.
2, 3,
It's a
4, 5,
math
6,
thing.
7, 8. So I only have half of what I need here. I would have to have.
Would the other ones be in the form of true, true, false, false? Or does it just go true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false? Or is that the next?
Well, one pattern is to just double them.
Okay.
And then double that. But now you can see what I would need to do is have, so for the next one though, it would be true for all of those cases. But then I would have to have a whole nother set. So I'd have to double this down here for all of the false S possibilities, right? So 16 lines. So basically, to demonstrate that this truth table shows that this is a valid argument form, I would need way smaller T's and X to fit the whole thing here.
So would S be true, false, true, false, true, false then?
Well, in order to have a pattern that covers all possibilities, I'm only going true, false with the first one. The second one I'm going true, true, false, false, all the way down. The third one I'm going 4 and 4. So on this one, I would have to go 8 and 8.
And this is how you get all the possibilities.
All the possibilities. Right? And then you could have, so obviously if I'm a computer, that's easy to do. But as a person with a whiteboard, it's
Working
tedious.
memory that only handles 3 things at a time.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that we can use indirect truth tables. This is presented on page 368. So say I have an argument. And the argument goes like this. So not the case, P and Q. P is the case. So therefore, Q is the case. You can build a table over here like this, right? But what I want to do is save the trouble of having to build the whole table. So what I want to do is figure out, well, what if I'm just looking for cases where Q is false to show that this is an invalid argument. So instead of doing all the possibilities, I'll just focus on where Q is false and see if I can make all the premises true. So what if I make P true? So that makes P true. So, but if Q is false, can I still get a true premise here? T and F will be false, but then it's negated. So it'll be true, right? So in this situation where P is true and Q is F, I will end up with the conclusion false, but both premises true. So I work backwards, but that saved me from doing 4 lines. But it works also with larger arguments, where you have maybe 16 lines, and you're thinking, well, let's not do all this work. Let's see if we could show this to be an invalid argument by just checking a situation where the conclusion is false and seeing if we can make all of the premises true. So that's a short version of the truth table. But when you think, still that's a lot of work. Can we do it still another shorter way of checking to see if our compound arguments are valid? And the answer is the propositional calculus. So what we do is we figure out all the valid argument forms, which we've already done, because we know all of those. We had the 8 arguments already in the book, right? And if I can basically attack an argument and keep throwing valid argument forms at it and eventually get the conclusion, that proves that it's a valid argument.
Thank you.
Now, of course, the problem is if you are doing that and you're not getting to the conclusion, does that mean that the argument's invalid? Maybe not. It might not. You might still have to do a truth table on those. And the reason for that is, well, I might just not be thinking of the solution. Might be my fault that it doesn't come out to be valid. So in that case, you probably still have to do a truth table to demonstrate that it's an invalid argument. And it'd be nice to use a shortened version of the truth table to still save time doing that. But let's do a couple exercises for that. That's page 373. We have an exercise. Use the indirect truth table method to determine whether the following arguments are valid or invalid. So the first one that they give us, this is page 373. First one they give us is R and Q or S. The second premise is R. Third premise, not the case Q. The conclusion is not the case S. So can I create a shortened version truth table to see if this argument is valid or not? Notice this is set up differently. Instead of all across the top, I've got it set up as 1, 2, 3. Here's my conclusion, right? So I have 3 premises. So I can still put them all in a line. So that's my first premise. Second premise. Third premise. And conclusion, right? And I want this to be false, which means that S has to be true, so that not true is be false, right? So I want S to be true. Now, keep in mind that since this is true and this is a disjunct, that means that this whole statement is true. So that's pretty easy for this one. But it also means that I have to make Q false so that not Q will be true. So Q has to be false. And R has to be true. So that makes that true, true, true is true. This was actually pretty easy to do. Because that goes to show that I could have the conclusion false, but all of my premises true. So this argument form is invalid. You know, it occurs to me that just the way the syllogisms, you have 256 possible syllogisms, but only 24 valid forms. Absolutely, you could have way more invalid forms in symbolic logic than you could have valid forms. Although you can have an infinite number of valid forms. So you clearly would have a larger infinite number of invalid forms than the infinite number of valid forms. And if that hurts your head,
Sounds like that kid who's talking about an infinite number of universes where God exists or doesn't exist.
Actually, it sounds like the transcendental numbers thing, where there's like more transcendental numbers than there are real or something.
Mm.
I never got that proof. Someone tried to explain it to me and it just way over my head.
well, there's an infinite number of points between my two hands.
Yeah.
But this infinite number of points is way larger than this infinite number of points.
Yeah, but in mathematics it's different because you can say that something has a limit, right? But you can also, like on the real line, you can have new numbers. So pi, for example, or the square root of 2. Those are their own numbers, and you can infinitely approach them. But they're not on like the normal whole number line. And then once you add in imaginary numbers, now you have, those are different categories of infinites that go beyond this concept of distance, which is usually how we relate to quantities.
If you like the concept of the infinite, there's a book by can't think of his name. How can that happen?
It's okay.
I'm spacing the name of the book too.
That's good, because my phone died. I'm going to feel bad about not being able to write it down.
I can look it up because I have a machine right here. David Foster Wallace is the author. And the name of the book is I'm sure it's, no, I don't want that one. Everything and More. A Compact History of Infinity.
That sounds fascinating.
It is. And hilarious. He is hilarious. So if you've never read a hilarious math book, there you go. You've got one.
I have read a hilarious math book. I read a book about paradoxes that my father gave to me when I was only 8 years old. Very interesting.
Okay, let's do one more of these. This is page 373, problem number 2. Therefore, S. Well, right away I can see a problem, and that is that this is a conjunction, and if S has to be false for me to demonstrate that it's invalid, I won't be able to get a false premise here, because if it's false here, this premise will always be false, so it's a valid argument for it.
Can we do that again? I felt my brain melt.
The conclusion is S.
Okay.
But one of the premises is and S.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Which means that if the conclusion is false, which would be the line I'd have to create in order to show it's invalid, right? In order for this to be false, this premise will be false, which means I will always have a false premise if the conclusion is false. So it's a valid argument.
Okay.
For it to be an invalid argument, you have to have a situation where all the premises are true and the conclusion false. But I can't have that with this argument.
Okay.
Because whenever the conclusion is false, one of the premises will be false.
Okay.
And we can see this without looking at any of the other properties in the...
Well, because this is a conjunction here with S. It'd be the same thing as if I had a premise, just S.
So a premise
just-
can't be a conclusion?
So
Is that what
S
you're
is
saying?
one of the premises and S is the conclusion.
So that can't be a thing.
So
That's not a thing.
if we were to read the argument though, it's R or Q
And S.
and S,
Q, not
not
R.
R. What does the Q mean? What does the Q mean?
It's just a premise, any statement.
So Q, not R, S. So in this, I'm confused. So wait,
So
why is there Q?
if someone were to argue S,
Uh-huh.
therefore S.
You're
Well,
stating the
that's-
same thing.
It's very circular, but he's valid.
Right,
Sandwich, so sandwich.
Exactly.
it's valid.
It's redundant, but it is true. Holy crap. Okay, I get it.
It may or may not be sound, but it's valid.
Well, eraser. So therefore, eraser.
Oh,
That's true, and it's valid, so it's a sound argument.
oh.
But if I keep doing that all day, somebody needs to get me some medicine. Because I'm not on my way to Princeton. You know, that's, you know,
Well, wait.
unless I keep going, eraser. And I have a look on my face that says, send that guy to Princeton.
Doesn't
Give him a salary,
Doesn't-
give him a house, let him walk with Einstein and Gödel every day, sit in the building and go, eraser.
Doesn't an argument have to have two parts? Like, it can't just be one statement, can it?
Syllogisms have to have two
parts.
premises.
Two premises.
And a conclusion.
But this isn't the same as that.
Strictly speaking, that's an argument,
Okay.
not a very interesting one, unless you're insane.
Is there a limit on how many premises you can have?
No?
So you could have like R and P, but not Q, then S, and not T, therefore A. And all
And
that
that's called
is.
good research.
Oh. All right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, I mean, you know, you want to make sure you have at least 250 pages. So,
Like a more practical question now.
or it's not a thesis, right? You know.
Like what's that called? Does the barber shave himself? Question. How would you represent that? Or is that not?
So this is a paradox, the barber paradox.
Yeah, the barber.
And
Can that be represented?
you have to explain the situation right. The barber of Seville shaves all of the men in the town who do not shave themselves. That's your first statement, right? So he shaves all of the men who do not shave themselves. So then the question usually is brought up, well, who shaves the barber? Well, obviously he shaves himself,
But he can't.
but the
do
problem is he shaves those who do not shave themselves. So you've got a paradox, because he's the one that shaves all of those who do not shave themselves. So he can't shave himself,
Right.
but he's the one that shaves everyone. So you end up with a dilemma or a paradox, right?
Right.
Now, this led to what was called the theory of types, because Russell tried to solve, because it's actually a paradox created in order to talk about zero. Zero, defined in set theory, is the set of all sets that have no members. All sets
Set theories on page 198.
that have zero members, right? So that's just like the barber, right? Now the problem is zero is a set of all sets that have no members, right? So how many sets are in the set zero? One. But that's impossible because zero is the set of all sets that have no members. So the definition of zero is wrong. Same way that the barber of Seville shaves all of those men that don't shave themselves, who shaves the barber, right? So you're
So it's a paradox. It's showing that there's a flaw in.
there's a flaw in set theory, which
No.
beat the crap out of poor Bertrand Russell. So he came up with the theory of types. Basically, the idea was when you're defining the set of all sets that have zero members, you can't be including the set that defines the set. In other words, you've got, this is type 1. This is type 2. So you cannot include this set in this set. You have to keep the types separate, right?
Okay.
Now, so, for example, the old joke about the Thebians or whoever they were that always lied.
Oh, the Thebians.
Was it
Yeah.
Thebians or
Yeah.
whatever, pick whatever ethnic group you want, right?
Mhm.
They always lie. And it's a Thebian that says that,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so it's called the liar's paradox, right?
So it's the same paradox. It's just in different
yeah,
forms.
yeah.
Ah.
So in that case, it seems like, well, the Thebian that tells me all Thebians lie, is he lying or not, right? Well, you solve the problem by saying, since he's type 2, and he's talking about all the Thebians, he's not lying when he says that all Thebians lie. So you get yourself out of the paradox by using type theory, right? Of course, yes.
Is that how you answered the question about if God is the strongest thing in the universe, then can God make an immovable rock? Is that how you did that, or is that not how?
Oh wow! I never thought of that.
Not
I
the
guess that
same?
makes sense.
It might be.
It might
I'm
be.
not sure.
It could be an answer.
I never put that together. You should be a philosophy major.
Really?
You could be a philosophy major and a justice major.
I really like the syllogisms. It was crazy that I learned that. I can't add, but I can do syllogisms.
And you're wearing a divine.
Feminine.
They just mentioned that on the ad for the seminary.
No way.
That was when they showed the one woman, and they said the divine feminine, didn't they?
They probably did. I don't know. I was so happy looking at the architecture that I wasn't paying attention to what they were saying.
They have modern condos, though.
Well,
On
that's
campus.
okay. You get to go spend all day in a place with incredible architecture. Could you imagine the smell in that place? It's gotta be amazing. It's
Someone likes old buildings, okay.
Yes. It's like smelling books, like going to the library. It's just,
That was not what I expected.
it's amazing.
I'm getting uncomfortable, and I don't know why.
I should be a philosophy major.
That's funny.
You don't like the smell of books?
No.
Really?
Well, and peppermint toothpaste, and freshly mown grass, and parchment.
Wait, you mean like paper made out of skin? Parchment?
I don't know.
Oh.
I'm just quoting Hermione.
Oh.
He likes Harry Potter so much.
No. It's impossible to like Harry Potter too much. Okay, so that's
would
the
that
theory of
work?
types.
With the God
That's
question?
not my fault.
Thank you.
That's just true.
Would that work with the God question?
I don't know.
Well, it's more of an omnipotence question. It's about the nature of omnipotence, right? You know, and can an all-powerful being do something that they cannot do? That they, yeah, by definition.
But he said he answered it. I don't know how he answered it.
Well, you could also say that the definition of omnipotence is wrong, just like you said that the definition of zero is wrong. So that would be your starting point.
Oh.
Yeah. That's what a paradox is. So like
What
a lot-
is your major?
my major? Economics.
Oh.
So like a fallacy, right? A fallacy shows a flaw in reasoning. A paradox shows a flaw in like a model that you have. Like Zeno's paradox shows the flaw of like limits, for example, right? Like he didn't have the concept of limits.
So if that definition doesn't explain it for you, you can go on. Bertrand Russell?
Did they not mention that he was a political activist?
He was arrested. He was in jail for a while. Lost his position at Cambridge because of it.
Over what?
Protesting the war. But so, yeah, we really don't want to get into that though, but that's set theory. So 0 is the empty set. 1 is a set containing the empty set, etc. So set theory is based on the definition of the sets. And of course the problem was 0 as the empty set doesn't work out because 0 is a member of the empty set. So his whole set theory, which was the basis of the 3-volume work, as they pointed out, failed miserably. So
What was that other book you mentioned? Did you say David Foster Wallace?
that was this one.
Everything wrong. I'll put it on the reading list. Got a long reading list every time. Every time I walk into this class, it gets longer. Everything and more.
that's that. Okay. So back to work. Should we take a break? Or have we had enough breaks as we've been going? Everybody take a break as they need one.
I don't care.
Oh, I'm turning on the light.
Thanks for that.
Sorry, I should have warned you.
I could use a few minutes to walk around.
Okay.